Yo, so I was just listening to a Huberman podcast and super interesting stuff. I wanted to, summarize it here for you and the world. So Huberman, Andrew Huberman is a professor of neurobiology or neuroscience, one or the other, over at Stanford, and he has a podcast which is separate from his work at the university. But it's all about like how the mind works and how the brain works, how the neurosystem works, obviously, right? So this first episode kind of went into just some really general stuff about the way our neurons are connected, how they communicate with each other through synapses, through chemical releases. And I don't want to really get into too much of the technical stuff. I highly recommend that you just go and watch his podcast. And, my goal is not to really get into the technical details, but just to show or to kind of share my perspectives and how I was able to relate to it, how maybe some other people like you out there watching right now could relate to it and apply it to your own lives. So anyways, the really interesting parts came towards the end of the first episode, where he started talking about learning and how people take in information, process it, internalize it, and it's really interesting stuff. So, one of the things is that about the whole concept of neuroplasticity, which if you haven't heard of neuroplasticity, I'm gonna go this way. Yeah, there we go. Get some sun in my face. So, neuroplasticity is the concept that the brain can change, that the way that neurons are wired can change over time, and it's pretty much the basis of how we learn things. And the traditional thought is that plasticity only exists in young people and children, and that once you get a certain age, your brain becomes static and you can't change after that. And I think that that's where the whole, that saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, that's entirely false. The reality is, as time goes on, we're finding that you learn things up until the day that you die. However, there definitely is a point where learning becomes harder. And I've definitely experienced that in my life now at this point. As I reflect on myself from 10 years ago, it's a lot harder to learn new things. It's a lot harder to pick up on new things. It's a much more active process. And that's exactly what the studies have been showing in the neuroscience community, that children learn in like a very passive way. They don't even need to try, and it's just natural. And it makes sense because, our species, that's how we're designed. I mean, that's why, you look at other species and they come out the mother ready to walk. Humans have a lot to learn. But anyways, there are certain little hacks that you can do to assist your learning and to make things easier just by being conscious of it. And that's the most powerful thing. Like, our brains may not be ready to do it on their own, but like when the mind puts forward the effort, we can change it. It's crazy. So here's one thing that was really cool. So another lab that Huberman cited, not his own lab, but a lab that he knows some people out or whatever, different university. Point is, they found that if you are studying, right, and you play like a bell or a chime or some kind of noise in the background, at regular intervals, not too frequent though, not like a constant tap, 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 or ding, 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 like the whole time, like probably not even a metronome would work, but, let's say like every 20 minutes, you have a certain bell that goes off, and then when you're asleep later that day or that night, if you play that bell again, it like triggers your brain to remembering what you were studying, and it almost reminds itself that it needs to remember that important thing that you were working at. Now, that also builds on the idea that when we're studying, we're not actually learning things. So sometimes I felt like this too, but maybe some of you can relate, but sometimes when you're trying to learn a new skill or do something new, sometimes you feel like it's really hard to make any progress, and it's maybe just because you're not taking the kind of steps that you need in order for your mind or your brain to truly process it and internalize it. And so another thing that you can try is sleeping better. Sleep is super important, and I only listened to the first episode so far, but he did mention that there's going to be more on sleep coming up. So as I continue to do these little summaries, then I'm sure I'll have more to share on that. But one thing that did come up, and this is super interesting, the way that we sleep occurs in these almost 90-minute intervals, and that when we go down for the night, for the first couple hours, you kind of have this shallow sleep. You don't really get into those deep states. And the thing about that is it kind of mirrors the way our brains work every day, like in our waking state. So if you've ever noticed that you're at work and especially if you're doing something that's not too physical, that's very mentally challenging, you start to feel very fatigued, and maybe you go to the break room for coffee, and that's just your brain needing a little bit of your brain telling you, hey, hold up, let's recharge for a second. And so it's really interesting that sleep mirrors that, because if we apply that to our waking state, and especially when we're trying to learn things or just do things, maybe you're not in a place in your life where you're needing to learn any new skills like I am right now, but let's say you're just applying this at work, you should see tremendous benefits from taking those regular intervaled kind of breaks. And it doesn't take long, maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes or something. And you'll find yourself very recharged. And if you can't find an employer, or you're at an employer that can't respect that, then I would suggest getting the fuck out. But that's a whole different topic. Now here's the thing though. Here's the caveat. When you take these little breaks, don't go and get on your phone. Don't go and check your emails. Don't even engage in anything that's mentally taxing at all, because you're not truly giving your brain enough time, or enough, enough of, I don't know, like, look, when you're looking at your phone or you're watching a YouTube video, you're taking in information, you're processing it, and so you're not really taking a break. You may be taking a break from whatever your job is or whatever subject you're studying, but your brain is still working, and you really need those times to just not think in order for this to be effective. And I find myself doing this all the time, and I recognize that it was a problem before, but now it's just like even more clear that this is not the right way to unwind. And he briefly mentioned this other state of existence, I guess, that's not really being awake or being asleep either. And it's not really an in-between state, but it's its own state entirely, which is supposed to come in a future podcast, but I'll have, I guess, more to say on that later. But essentially, it's this other state where it almost sounds to me like meditation, but I don't know if that's what it is yet. But it's basically just this time where you just don't have any sort of mental stimulus, where you just sit there and just let your brain build those neuro connectors, or work on those synapses, and kind of build those new associations in your mind. So the value of taking an entire break from everything, just sit in your room by yourself, stare at the wall, literally, give that a try, and you may see your results improving. If you're at work, I don't know, go to the break room. That's what they're for, right? What else was interesting? Here's one last really interesting thing. So it turns out that we have these sort of modulators that are almost acting like barriers in our mind that really don't even develop until much later in life. And it's basically what happens when you are triggered by something and you decide for the better that it's best not to engage. And it's basically the difference between being impulsive and being methodical, being more deliberate with how you act, with how you respond to things. And it turns out, this is really interesting, it turns out that part of your brain that modulates it, which is a great thing, doesn't fully develop until most people are 25 years old. That's insane. I mean, some people, for sure, some people it happens sooner. Some people it probably even happens later than that. And, depending on your habits and your life circumstances, that may also play a role in not just purely biology. But the point is that we really don't develop these kind of skills until we're well into our adult life, right? So I just wanted to say, it's kind of funny that we expect people at 18 to be making these crazy life decisions like pull out a bunch of loans for school for something that they're not even sure they want to do, or join the military, and all kinds of other crazy messes, right? So yeah, I think that's all. Oh, no, I'm sorry. There's one more thing. Oh man, this is going longer than I expected. But there was one more really interesting part. There's basically three stages of doing something. There is the, well, not stages, but the way you think about it can be broken down into stages. And it goes, what was it? It was outcome. No, outcome is the last one. There is, I forgot the first one, but it's almost like the motivation or the inspiration to do something, and then the path, and then the outcome. And a lot of times, the hardest part is just the motivation. But if you can get inspired to do something, then you should immediately start planning it out and building that path. And always make sure that you also have an outcome in mind, because those three things are extremely crucial to accomplishing anything. And really, that first barrier, it comes back down to what I was just saying about having that modulator there to prevent you from just acting impulsively. This is why it's so difficult to just get up and do things when you're older, because those modulators have already developed, and it's part of being an adult. It's a very healthy thing, but at the same time it can hinder us, because it can basically talk us out of wanting to try something new. But if you could just remember the outcome and the feeling that you're going to have after you achieve it, and doing the hard thing and not just taking the easy path out, then the reward should far outweigh the struggle in getting there. So anyways, thanks for listening. Keep looking out for more of this kind of content. I really do want to get this YouTube thing going, because there's a lot of ideas that I just want to share, and that I'd like a lot of feedback on. So if you like this type of thing, let me know. Share some of your thoughts. If you want to elaborate or correct me on anything that I've said, please, I invite you. All right, thanks. Take care.